Welcome to On Three's College Football Playoff Selection Show. I'm Andy Staples. He's JD Piquel. We have no idea what's going to happen. We have not seen the rankings. I don't think anybody's... the people in the committee have probably seen the rankings.
Yep.
They've probably argued over the rankings.
Graphics person.
The graphics person is the most important person in this whole deal. They hold the keys to the kingdom.
Literally. Quite literally.
And in this one, because all these other ones, this is the 10th college football playoff, 10th 14 playoff. In all of these other ones, we basically know what was going to happen. The first one, we weren't entirely sure. One, because we'd never seen the process before. We didn't know how any of it worked. And it was, will it be Ohio State or will it be one of TCU or Baylor? Mm-hmm. But have we had any others that even seemed remotely like that? Alabama in 2017, maybe?
Maybe, but it really does feel like every single Selection Sunday we sit here and we all just breathe this big exhale and say, yep, that feels about right. That feels about right. And that's kind of what we thought it would be today, Andy, like you opened with. Legitimately so much just question marks. I mean, I drove home last night from Atlanta, 3.5-hour drive, probably went through 3 different top 4s, and they all made sense to me.
There is going to be somebody furious after this, and justifiably so. Whether it is Florida State getting left out at 13-0, Alabama having won the SEC, having gotten the best win of the season yesterday against Georgia, being left out. I don't see how this happens, but what if they left Texas out and put Alabama in?
Oh, my goodness.
Despite the fact that Texas has a head-to-head win. Like, those are the scenarios we're talking about. And I was there yesterday in Atlanta. I watched Kirby Smart talk about how they should be in the top 4.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an argument there that the committee's going to make. I think there's, like, if you're a bookmaker, you're saying, but you're also trying to get Ohio State in too, along with Georgia.
Sure.
This is, it really comes down to, there will be some combination of Michigan or Washington at 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. And I think the argument about whether Washington should be number 1 has been just snowed over by who gets in at 4.
Sure.
But can we talk about that?
I think we can. I mean, I think Washington, if you talk about like how impressive a finish it was in that Pac-12 title game.
Right.
I mean, Vegas had them at 9.5-point dogs. 9.5-point dogs. I mean, that was so definitive.
Would you say they went through a more difficult grind in the Pac-12 than Michigan did in the Big Ten?
Without question.
The Penn State win on the road and the Ohio State win are obviously huge wins for Michigan. But I would say the 2 wins against Oregon, probably about equal to those.
Oregon State on the road.
Yeah.
I mean, Utah wasn't an easy out by any stretch. I mean, if I'm thinking about like climbing mountains between the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, Michigan probably had some steeper rock faces to climb. But then I think overall the difficulty for Washington was just much more steep.
Yeah. So but I don't think that's what they're going to do.
No, I think
they're going to make Michigan number 1.
Yep.
Washington number 2. The question is what happens at 3 and 4. Yeah. And I think in other years, if there wasn't all of this Sturm and Drang, if it was a more normal situation, Florida State would just be slotted in at 3.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what they're going to do.
No, I don't think so either.
And the other complicating factor of this is that Texas played Alabama. If Texas and Alabama had not played, then we would have I think we'd be having a totally different conversation because it would be Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Alabama. It would be done.
Yep.
That would be the whole conversation. No one would say, even if Texas had beaten a really good team, like let's say Texas had beaten Ole Miss or Missouri or Penn State or somebody like that, I don't think it would have mattered.
No.
We'd have just been like, oh, that's fine. But I think that's an interesting point to this because we keep saying the games have to matter. Why else do we play the games? Well, they played the Texas-Alabama game. Texas won by 10 in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and Boo Corrigan said, like, we're not worried about the timing of that. Like, week 2 is to week 10, and now kind of take that at face value.
Right, teams do evolve.
Some recency bias baked into that. Like, how do you not consider that a little bit? But still, that wins age tremendously.
I would argue that the Texas we've seen in the last 2 weeks is better than the Texas that played Alabama.
I would argue that as well. I mean, Quinn Ewers looks so comfortable. That defense has been dominant. Now Texas Tech versus some other opponents.
And no Jonathan Brooks, obviously.
Yep, no Jonathan Brooks. So, but even still, I think Texas, when it comes to the style points, they probably needed to put them into. I was kind of thinking, a couple weeks ago, I was like, Andy, I don't know. Maybe they need some style points. Maybe they're on the bubble. They, I think, have wiped away any concern for me of them being a top 4 team today.
Yeah, I'm not worried about them necessarily, but I also think that guides how you rank the teams.
Yeah, has
like
to.
you're not putting Alabama above Texas if you're going to have them both in.
No.
Texas would be 3, Alabama would be 4. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, what are you doing to Florida State? Yeah. Because Florida State went 13-0, Power 5 schedule, and you'd be like, oh, but did they schedule anybody good in the out of country? Oh, yeah, they played LSU.
Yep.
And they play Florida every year. Now, it's not Florida State's fault that Florida wasn't good this year. They've definitely had some years where they had to deal with a really good Florida team.
Definitely.
And so it's like Florida State's one of those, you can never accuse them of playing a weak non-conference. No. They always try to play a good non-conference. And that's the other part of this is it's going to feel like they're getting punished for this if they get left out. And I think the committee has an easy out if they want to leave Florida State out by saying Jordan Travis is injured. If Jordan Travis were playing, if their number one quarterback, their leader were playing, we would have put them in, which may or may not be true, but they can say that. Mm-hmm. They have the out to say that. The thing about it is, because a lot of the resume judging, you judge on what sort of challenges you face, what did you overcome. I would argue that what Florida State did in the ACC championship game against Louisville, maybe the best coaching job of the year.
Yeah, without question. I mean, people are like, from an optic standpoint, people that aren't really watching college football are saying, yeah, well, it was Louisville. No, Louisville had 10 wins this year.
Right,
Louisville's that brought in 25 transfers. It was phenomenal this year.
Louisville's offense is actually pretty good.
Yes.
So how well did Adam Fuller's defense play to make them look that incompetent?
Phenomenal.
They were incredible. And I thought Mike Norvell, the game plan he put together for Brock Glenn to mask having to play a true freshman who'd never started a game, who got thrown into this situation after Tate Rodemaker went in concussion protocol, like that game plan was spectacular.
Yep.
They won it in basically the only way they could win it.
Exactly.
But the committee can still say, you don't have Jordan Travis, and we need you to have Jordan Travis for us to believe you can beat Michigan.
And I think the thing you say if you're Florida State is you look back at them, and I think there's probably some burden of proof on the committee. It's almost like innocent until proven guilty, innocent of not being good until proven otherwise. Because you're saying everything about us as Florida State is hypothetical. Well, you think if we played Alabama, it would look this way. If you think we would play this way, like it's all we think, we thought, which is sort of what we're doing here at the end of the day. But all the speculation around Florida State, you'd have to feel, and everyone will feel this way over in the 5 spot, you'd have to feel so slighted in that sense.
We assumed that Michigan would crush TCU last year.
Yep.
TCU won the game. So
I assumed Georgia would crush Bama yesterday, and that wasn't the case.
Exactly. And that's why they play them. And that's why it's going to be better next year when this stuff gets settled on the field. Like, if anything, this scenario, which I'm shocked that it took this long to get to one like this, proves how stupid the 14 playoff was as an idea.
Sure.
Like, you have 5 Power 5 conferences and 4 spots. What did you think was going to happen?
Sure.
Like,
yeah.
And I realize part of it was to manufacture drama just like this. But I guarantee you people will much more enjoy the drama next year when these teams are in and it's a matter of who they play and where they play. Like, right now we'd be talking about between Florida State and Alabama. And I think there's no problem leaving Florida State at 4 and putting Alabama at 5 in a 12 team, because who's the 5 seed going to play? They're going to Liberty at home probably.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then those two will play each other in a semi or in a quarterfinal. So it's not going to be like this next year. I feel bad for the committee members having to do this year because honestly, I would go into hiding after this thing, no matter what they decide.
This is the worst job in America in the last 24 hours. There's literally not a right way to do this.
No.
And it feels like there is like the conversation we're having now is like right way versus maybe best way. Between Florida State being the undefeated conference champ, and there's a bunch of speculation. And then there's the best team that we're all thinking,
keep using all these subjective words: right way, best way, best team, most deserving team,
favorite on neutral field.
Yeah, these are all subjective things. This is all a beauty pageant. It's not like the NFL has a system. You may disagree with that system where the winner of a weak division gets a home game instead of a team that had a much better record that had to get a wild card because they were stuck in a tougher division. But at least you know going in exactly what the rules are and exactly what you have to do.
Yep.
It's not like that in college football. It won't be like that next year either. But the difference is, if you're a one-loss team, you're gonna be in.
Yeah, yeah. And I honestly I appreciate the fact that there's still some extra suspense to it today, because I think the thing that I'm concerned about next year, and this is a whole rabbit hole we could go down and discuss for an hour.
We got time. They're vamping. They're running commercials on the show.
Exactly. Resumes and a countdown over there on the old ticker for ESPN. But I appreciate the fact that we got Alabama and Georgia, and it means something. And it's not just about seeding.
Right.
I think there's something that's special about that. It's going to be, better, worse is probably the wrong conversation to have. It'll be different in a lot of ways.
Okay, so
I like
let's
Michigan, Ohio
talk
State
about
for
that.
a playoff spot. I love that.
If we're in the 12-team scenario, what did yesterday do?
Probably impacted Louisville. Right.
Georgia loses a bye.
Yep.
Probably is hosting, but has to play in that first round.
Yep.
Alabama may or may not get a bye. Texas gets a bye because of that, because they beat Alabama. Now, obviously, next year, Texas and Alabama will be the same conference, so that's a different story. But we'll be dealing with that. We'd also be dealing with Tulane losing to SMU, which probably costs them a playoff spot and puts Liberty in, we think.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of interested
find out here in a minute,
where they put Liberty, and do they try to sneak another Group of 5 conference champ up? Like, do they bump Troy up or something?
Could you imagine?
I don't think they do. I think Liberty's going to get in, but that would be another. And then the 8-9 host or go on the road would be a very contentious thing.
Yeah, Ohio State fans are probably dialed in to see where they fall. Penn State fans, Missouri fans. I mean, I would say this for
Ole Miss,
a 12-team
Oklahoma
playoff
would be right on the cut line.
I think a 12-team playoff, if you're supporting that, Missouri feels like a really good team to carry that banner for you, because they have been hot at the right time. And that's not what we're talking about in this show, but I mean, I think they're one of those teams that a 12-team can make a run.
Well, right. And so Missouri, based on where they're ranked now, would have to go on the road, and they'd have to play somebody really good in a game that we would love to watch.
100%. Yeah.
Now, I will point this out, and I'll point it out again depending on how the rankings actually fall. There could have been a 12-team playoff this year.
Yeah.
Remember, that group that put it together was Greg Sankey from the SEC, Bob Bowlesby, then the Big 12 commissioner, Craig Thompson, then the Mountain West commissioner, and Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame AD. They put it together. It got preliminary approval. It could have gone for 2023, and then the SEC takes Texas and Oklahoma, and you have some people saying, let's put the brakes on. You had the Alliance. You had the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12. Now, as we've figured out, that was an okie doke that the Big Ten perpetrated on the ACC and the Pac-12. Why? So the Big Ten could finish its TV deal without another competing product in the marketplace.
Sure.
And what did that cause? Well, the Pac-12 got ripped apart, so you destroyed your own league for that, and the ACC might have a 13-0 champ that doesn't get into the playoff.
Yep.
Congratulations. Good job, guys.
Yeah, it's a weird time for it to happen, because I would say this too, when it comes to this whole 12-team discussion, I personally am against the whole expanded playoff thing. I think we probably
bad news they're doing it.
I know they're doing it, but I'm saying a year like this, I think gets me a little bit more on board with it. I think you see much more merit.
It's going to be so much better. And once the actual games start,
definitely,
we're going to laugh that anybody thought they should stay at 4.
I think 4 is great. I think 6 is probably better than 12 in my mind. Another discussion. It's happening. Hey, I'm going to be on board with it.
Trust me, when those
it.
Big 12 games in November are going wild, as everybody's trying to get in that conference championship game, trying to get that automatic bid, it's going to be fun. I promise. But back to this year.
Yep.
This is an impossible circumstance for the committee.
Yep. No-win situation.
And I know, but again, we talk about subjective. There are people out there watching, and they're in the comments. They're going, it's not impossible. What are you talking about? As long as Michigan, Washington, and Florida State are in, who cares who else is in? And I understand that point of view.
Yeah.
I get it. Like, I respect that point of view. But I got to be honest. Alabama can beat all those teams.
100%. I mean, heck, you can take it a step further and say, if I'm a Georgia fan.
And Texas can beat Alabama because we've seen it happen.
Georgia in, they could absolutely make a run of this thing. So the best 4 teams, that's becoming a very thin ice to walk on.
It's always been that it's supposed to be the best 4 teams.
Right.
But they've not always done that. Like TCU last year, if we're just saying subjectively, poll everybody, we have Michigan at number 1.
There we go. Okay. We got action.
Michigan is number 1, as we expected. So my arguments fell on deaf ears about Washington potentially being number 1.
Sure.
But Michigan is number 1. I think we can pretty safely assume Washington's number 2.
And I think that's probably the right order. As good as Washington has been, as good as Michigan's been. I mean, I know a big thing with Michigan all year long was the eye test. That was why they were at 3 before playing anybody ranked. 1's probably right for Michigan.
By the way, can we just step back and think about this for a second? Jim Harbaugh was suspended for 6 of 13 games.
Yeah.
And Michigan's the number 1 seed in the playoff. Like, how weird, how wild is that?
Took half the year off. That's a great job. You say, I'm taking PTO for half this year.
He took Saturdays off.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Those suspend and they're because they're different types of suspensions. If you had a self-imposed, Washington is number 2.
There you go.
If you had a self-imposed NCAA or a self-imposed suspension, you can say work during the week, take Saturday off. If it's an NCAA suspension, which that was on the table too, you would have had to miss it.
Still on the table, quite frankly.
Well, it is, but not for this year.
Yep.
So, just wild to think that 6 of the 13 games, the head coach was not there, number 1 seed.
And speaks volumes to what Michigan is too.
Oh, and Sharon Moore,
to do it without your head coach on the sideline says a lot about that roster.
Well, and it's a lot of a reason why they're the number 1 seed. You feel like this roster, if they get into some situations in the playoff where games are tight or tough, that they're going to coalesce around one another and probably be pretty good. And the fact that we've seen now Sharon Moore, that's the interesting. Didn't have the same acting head coach in the 6 games.
Yeah.
4 of those games were Sharon Moore games. I think we know now he's a good game day coach.
Great, yeah.
A good game day player. Texas is number 3.
That's big.
All right.
That's huge. Okay, so what does that tell you about that 4 spot? All make you feel more or less confident about Bama at 4?
No, because this is what we thought was going to happen.
Okay. I think you can make an argument for Florida State at 3, being undefeated.
All right, I get where you're going. I'm picking up what you're putting down. So that means that Texas Bama's win pulled Texas to 3 because Texas must be ahead of Bama.
So this means we get an Alamo Bowl rematch from last year. How about that?
How about that?
Difference a year makes. How about that? Washington, Texas. That'll be a good one.
It's an okay Alamo Bowl.
Wasn't bad. I wouldn't have picked it as a playoff spot, a playoff matchup a year later, but that was a good game.
Now I would assume we're going to get the Washington Texas game in the Sugar Bowl.
Sure.
Because I don't think Michigan wants to. Well, that's not true. Either way, Florida State or Alabama, I don't think you want to play them in New Orleans.
I'm holding my breath here for this 4th spot.
It's wild.
I'm legitimately on edge.
I think they need to go to commercial. If I'm ESPN, I'm going to go to commercial before this. Like I am not. I'm going to milk this for all it's worth.
I'm running a YouTube mid-roll right now, live. If you're the committee or if you're ESPN, but what does your gut tell you here, Andy?
I think it's going to be Alabama.
You think so? I think that's the best thing to do.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's Florida State.
Yep.
But since you said that a couple minutes ago about Texas going to 3. Now you're in my head. Like,
I've infiltrated.
Because I think you may be right. If they were going to do Florida State and Texas, they would make Florida State 3.
Doesn't it feel that way a little bit? I mean, and it really feels like they've gotten out. And I don't know how much the PR is involved with the actual committee, but we've really hammered home the best 4 teams, relevant players, like all this. It feels like, I'm holding my breath here as we're looking to maybe find the 4th team here. You think they'll go 5 or 6? Think they'll go 4 right now? Will they make us wait for 4?
They'll go 6. Here's 6, Georgia.
My heart dropped. I thought that was 4. I was like, they actually did it.
No,
they went for it.
No, they were milking this. It reminds me of like when America's Funniest Home Videos came out. They would announce who was second place first, and then they would have 1 and 3 in the boxes. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just announce 3rd place first and have 1 and 2 in the boxes? Because I already know which one was the worst of the 3.
It was like that Steve Harvey moment where he crowns the wrong Miss America.
Yes.
If that's what it felt like. I was like, oh my goodness, they punched the wrong graphic or the wrong. Like, I don't know what
graphics.
happened.
We got it. Alabama's number 4.
Wow. You called that.
You called that.
We called that together. Hey, that is, to be clear, that is the best thing. That is the best thing for the player.
For the viewer.
I think it's the best right team. I think it's the best 4 teams. And you got to credit the committee.
Okay. Even though I've said that's what it's going to be since last night, like watching it, seeing Florida State slotted in there at number 5, like makes me droop.
Oh, your heart breaks for them. Heart breaks.
They did everything they could do.
Heart breaks.
Every single thing they could do.
Yep.
They lost their quarterback and they kept winning. Like, it's just like, if I'm Mike Norvell, there's nothing I can say to those guys.
Nothing. What do you say? Hey guys, we should have done X, Y, and Z thing different?
If I'm Florida State's president, I am calling the conference office and saying, once again, you have failed us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have completely failed us.
Absolutely.
Because again, this is partially Jim Phillips' fault that there's not a 12-team playoff this year.
Yep.
So, if Jim Phillips is looking around his office and going, why is my petard here and why am I being hoisted on it? You did this to yourself.
I don't know what a petard is.
Well, you get hoisted by it.
Okay,
It's the thing you get hoisted by. So it's amazing to me. And yeah, if I'm Michael Alford, the AD at Florida State, I am even further in my bag about trying to get out of the ACC because the ACC failed you.
100%.
Absolutely failed you.
Without question. Without question. I mean, if you're Florida State, there literally is nothing else you could have earthly controlled.
Yep.
So, I mean, it really is, I think. And it's hard because I lean one way where I say, if you're Florida State, you should be livid. You have every right to be livid. But then I lean the other way and say, okay, well, these are the best 4 teams. This is what the committee is supposed to do.
Right, because they were given these parameters.
Yep.
They were told there are 4 slots, and it's the 4 best. We had Greg McElroy on the show on Thursday, and he said that the number of playoff teams should just flex based on how many deserving teams there are each year. Mm-hmm. And so this year you could have 8. Another year you could have 4.
I don't hate that.
Another year you could just BCS it and do 2.
I don't hate that at all.
I think it'd be great. I told him that his bosses at ESPN were having panic attacks that he would even mention that. They like things nice and tidy.
Yeah.
Like they like to know what it's going to be. So Michigan and Alabama will play in the Rose Bowl.
Yep.
That is going to be January 1st, 5 p.m. Eastern, sun setting over the San Gabriel Mountains, followed by Washington and Texas in the Sugar Bowl. It is. So Michigan, Alabama. Think about this. Rose Bowl. Michigan, Alabama, Harbaugh, Saban, all of the things at once.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the defense that Alabama saw yesterday against Georgia. Michigan's probably watching that game back and saying, oh, boy. Oh, boy, we got to defend that quarterback design. And we talked about it after the game yesterday. It wasn't like Georgia was just confused defensively. Mm-hmm. They just got straight up out physical and out leveraged and just beat. Just plain old-fashioned beat.
What I want to see, because that Georgia defensive line this year, not the aliens it's been the last 2 years. Guess who has aliens on their defensive line?
That would be the Michigan Wolverines.
Kenneth Grant is a freaking alien.
Yep.
I'm so excited.
I wonder a little bit about the team speed compared to Georgia. Like, do you think Michael Barrett's running like Smile Munden is? Do you think they got
I think
guys
it's
that
close.
Are
it's
them?
probably not identical, but I think the gap between Michigan athletically and the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the Georgia has closed considerably in the past few years.
Definitely.
I mean, I think back to the Michigan-Ohio State game 8 days ago, it didn't feel like there was an appreciable difference.
No.
And Ohio State's roster is just as athletic as Georgia's or Alabama's.
You think about the way where Michigan has shown some humanity. It's been on the back end with Maryland throwing the ball, Ohio State throwing the ball, and Ohio State has aliens in the wide receiver core. Alabama threw the ball well yesterday.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a drop back pass. Not
as good of a receiving core as what Michigan just saw in Ohio State.
Definitely not.
But Michigan has not seen anything like Jalen Milroe. And honestly, I don't think Georgia had seen anything like Jalen Milroe, and I'm not sure anybody had seen that Jalen Milroe. Maybe LSU did.
Sure, yeah.
But they really seem to have kind of unlocked what he does best. And we saw a Jalen Milroe game against Georgia where he didn't make any of those mistakes that really kind of hamstrung him early in the season.
Yeah, he played really clean football. And quite frankly, I think Michigan and Georgia are similar in the same way we talked about yesterday. Mm-hmm. They feed off your mistakes. Yeah. Does Georgia? Michigan the exact same way. They're going to play tennis with you. They're going to continue to just run the football, take the air out of the game. If Jalen Milroe plays the kind of game he played yesterday against Georgia, Alabama's going to have a real good shot in that Rose Bowl. Very good chance.
Yeah, and I'm just like, the plays that they were running, at quarterback sweep. We talked about this on the field at the Georgia Dome. Mm-hmm. Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I'm going back to say that. Sorry, Georgia Dome. But that quarterback sweep where against Georgia had it played correctly, but Alabama just blocked it effectively.
Just elephants on parade on the perimeter. They were just, pun intended,
perfect,
quite frankly. I mean, to what you said, I mean, the athletic gap has definitely closed, like you said, between the rosters of Michigans and the Georgias and the Alabama's. But then you add Jalen Milroe into that, and it kind of makes that gap a little. I mean, it's kind of just any given third down, he can make it happen for you.
We know these quarterbacks have their favorites and who they like, and clearly Isaiah Bond and Jalen Milroe have a bond, pun intended, as well. I mean, I don't deserve that.
Was good.
I don't deserve a fist pound for that. But they clearly have a connection that is developing over time. And you're going to have another 3 weeks of practice to get that figured out against a really good defense. I'm trying to think, is this Michigan defense the best defense they'll have played? It's probably comparable to Georgia's yesterday.
It's probably similar. I think it's probably, like you said, on the defensive line, they're probably better than Georgia, and at least in the interior, with Kenneth Grant being 340 and can chase down running backs from 20 yards away. Like,
poor Katron Allen never saw it coming.
That's going to be a different beast.
Yeah.
That's going to be a different beast. So I'm curious because Alabama too, like we talked about, they're more of they probably scare you more when they get out on the perimeter. And so I mean, if it ends up being a thing where you're running away from Kenneth Grant, what does that look like if you're Alabama? How does it set you up?
Yeah, and then Harbaugh, Saban. We've actually seen this game before in a Citrus Bowl.
That's right.
They have played each other once.
We did see that. Yeah.
It was not pretty. But this is a different situation entirely. And listen, given everything swirling around Michigan, given that Jim Harbaugh has tried to go to the NFL a couple of times and I think still has that itch, and there's some jobs open that he might be a fit for, and the NCAA stuff, and.
A lot of ands.
This potentially is Jim Harbaugh's last game as Michigan's head coach, or has a chance to make it his penultimate game as Michigan's head coach if they win. Like, there's going to be a lot here.
If there were to be a spot where you would ride off into the sunset, and ride off into the sunset is maybe the wrong word if you lose that football game, but the backdrop of the Rose Bowl, you got Alabama, I mean, golly.
And the winner of this game is probably the favorite in the national title game.
Yeah, and they should be. And
even if it's Texas Alabama in the rematch, Vegas doesn't change its mind easily.
I don't think so.
And they may make Alabama a favorite again in that game.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, in terms of drama. I don't think people actually care about ratings, but if they did, this will get a massive rating.
This will be very good. I'm watching.
Well, that's kind of our job.
Yep.
But this will be one that I think everybody has on the bucket list of seeing Jim Harbaugh, Nick Saban in the Rose Bowl with massive stakes. Now, let's talk about the game in New Orleans, because I think this one could be a blast to watch, because when these two offenses really get flying, there's not much anybody can do.
Curious what the over is right now when it comes to that game in New Orleans.
So
That's going to be a good one.
I'm going to say 68.5.
Okay, I was going to say somewhere in the 70 range. Yeah, probably
because
flirt with 70,
I think the defenses are a little better than we give them credit for.
Definitely. Texas looked awesome yesterday.
Well, Texas's interior, we talked about aliens on the Michigan. T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy.
From Mars.
Probably the best combo inside of anybody in the country. They are awesome. And T'Vondre Sweat, we saw him catch a touchdown pass. Dual threat.
A little Heisman there.
Dual threat.
I like it.
I haven't filed my ballot yet.
Okay.
I mean, I
don't want to get you in trouble.
I can't say Heisman Trust don't pull my vote, but
there we go.
I'm just saying. So this could be an absolute blast. Michael Penix Jr., because I think it was very interesting, the dynamics leading into the Pac-12 championship game. It felt like Vegas especially, but the world in general had just turned on Washington. They'd played tight games, lived dangerously between beating Oregon the first time and getting to the Pac-12 title game. Meanwhile, Oregon had just steamrolled everybody. But nobody, and we talked about this on the show a lot last week, like, why wasn't anybody asking the question, and I guess a few of us were, if Washington beat them the first time, was there a particular matchup problem that Washington was exploiting? And I think what it was is Washington's receivers were better than Oregon's corners.
Definitely.
And I think Washington's receivers are probably going to be better than Texas's corners too. The question is, can Texas's pass rush get to Penix in time to make that matter? Because I think you saw at points in the two games against Oregon, where Oregon did get pressure, they were very effective against Penix. But as soon as he found some time to throw, good God, that it's so beautiful to watch.
Yeah. And once they brought pressure too in that game, like just watching the game, you kind of felt a little bit of like, oh, whenever you bring someone from second or third level, usually there's some real estate behind them.
Yeah, you're giving up
was
something.
Phenomenal at finding that. And then to flip it on its head, when you talk about defensively for Washington against Texas, I think that over's in trouble because there's so many weapons for both these teams. Talking about Texas, you want to take away Xavier Worthy? We got Adonai Mitchell. You want to take away one of those guys? We got Jatavian Sanders. So just the
Jatavian Sanders is the biggest X factor of all, because I think other than Brock Bowers, Sanders is the best tight end in college football.
Yeah.
Now I know the Loveland and Barner at Michigan want to say something about that.
Fair.
But Sanders is such a weapon. He's so versatile, and he really he makes it hard to defend them because you have to know what he's doing and you have to be aware of what he's doing on every play. And so he may not even be the target, or maybe he's like the third option, but you are focusing resources on him at all times.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing I would say too is both these teams are extremely poised. Like we have two really just adult, mature teams. Look at that Texas defense. Bunch of juniors and seniors. I mean, looked at Washington after they beat Oregon. It didn't feel like they won a Pac-12 title game. They were all just very much like, yeah, good win, awesome, on to the next one. And I was like, this is the last Pac-12 title game ever. Well, this is a big deal.
Let's think about the evolution of Steve Sarkisian, what this game means about that. So he's going to play against the program where he was first to head coach. Mm-hmm. And what was the knock on Steve Sarkisian at Washington? Couldn't get past meh. He was 8-4, kind of 500 in the conference. That was what they were. And they couldn't ever get over that hump. And he gets the USC job. We know what happened there. You know, he has to leave the job. He goes into rehab. He gets everything together. Apart from that, the part in his personal life, he's evolved quite a bit professionally. I think the Steve Sarkisian who coached Washington never could have done this year with Texas. Like, they would have fallen apart after they lost to Oklahoma. This guy kept them together, had Texas playing in a way that we have not seen Texas play since the height of the Mac Brown era.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing that sticks out to me is kind of that checkpoint of getting back into football and who he got under football with Nick Saban. Like, this team feels to me like playing their best ball at the right time, tough in the interior. The way that he even talks about his team with the little things, talks about Keelan Robinson catching a touchdown, then running down on kickoff and making an attack. He's like, that's the standard we have internally. I mean, they remind me of a Nick Saban kind of team.
We had Tavondre Sweat on my show, and I asked him what his favorite thing to do, like favorite bonding activity with the other defensive lineman was. You know what he said?
Lift weights.
Position meetings.
There we go.
Meetings are the most boring thing ever. And I was like, oh, well, you know, what's your chosen camp? Like, I'm thinking they're eating gummy worms together. Not even allowed to bring food in there.
Wow.
And they just like being together and figuring out a way to wreck your offense. Like,
the ball.
That's incredible. And it's rare. Like, there are not a lot of teams that have that. I think the teams that get to this point are the ones that do. But Washington, let's talk about Washington's offensive line.
Yeah.
Because I think the country discovered there's some athletes up there watching that Pac-12 championship game. Like, watching those dudes pull, they're moving. You're talking about 300-pounders that can get downhill in a hurry.
The edge that I thought in the Pac-12 title game that was going to eventually lean towards Oregon was just that, the line of scrimmage. I was like, okay, well, that first time around, Washington kind of diced them up, but Dylan Johnson getting downhill behind that offensive line, like, it's not just we're going to scheme you up and spread you out.
Right.
It's like, we're actually going to go maul you physically, man-to-man. And they did that against Oregon, and I think it could be a very, very good matchup with Texas.
And then we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Kalen DeBoer. Yeah. Because there are very few coaches where you always feel like they have the right call on. Like, even when they get cute, you're like, I see where he was going with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he has been, I don't even give enough credit to what he's done there in such a short period of time at Washington. I mean, heck, Alabama tried to get Ryan Grubbs away from him this past offseason. He was able to keep him. I think it speaks volumes to what he's built there and the belief they have internally.
I'm very excited about these two games. I feel so bad for Florida State. Let's talk about them a little more. Yeah. I realize all the discussion is probably going to move on to the playoff itself, but let us talk about the job that Mike Norvell has done over the past 4 years. I remember when he was 0-4 year two, they'd lost to Jacksonville State. It felt like everything was falling apart. It felt like they would never be able to figure it out. The fan base wanted him fired, but they just fired Willie Taggart. They didn't really have the money to fire anybody else. And he said, he had a press conference. He got testy with somebody asking a question. And he said, I know it will get better because I see it every day, and we're not changing. And you saw it that year where they fought and fought and fought. They didn't win them all, but they kept fighting. And then last year, they had that 3-game losing streak, and everybody's like, are we sure this is the guy? And then they reel off a winning streak. And then this year, everything comes together. And what sucks is that everything came together, and the system prevented them from actually competing for a championship.
Legitimately one of from the outside looking in, at least by nature of how they've won games and how they've progressed since he's been there, got to be one of the strongest cultures in college football.
Absolutely.
And he's done it with transfer portal
Right, they keep bringing
He's done it
portal
with
guys in.
Keon Coleman,
Yeah.
Jaheim Bell, Jordan Travis is a transfer, Ventrell Sipe. I mean, guys that made big time, not just like role players, like big time
Huge.
contributors.
Jared Verse.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think this is, I mean, if you're a Florida State fan, let's call a spade, like this sucks. This absolutely
awful.
sucks. And there's nothing that you feel like you should do differently besides have maybe some better luck with how things went in that North Alabama game.
Get yourself in the SEC of the Big Ten.
It's just, I mean, it's
and I realize
horrific.
that's not
Horrific.
That's probably not possible with the grant of rights, but it is like we talked about that all August. That's what they want to do. And if they were in one of those leagues this year, they'd probably be in the playoff. I mean, they definitely would if they had this record. But it's just it's there. I feel so bad, and I've talked to different coaches who've been through this. I remember talking to James Franklin after Penn State was left out of the playoff in 2016 when they won the Big Ten, but Ohio State was put in instead. Well, literally, it was actually Washington got in over Penn State. Ohio State was the 3 seed. But if you're sitting there watching a team you beat in the conference you play in get in, what do you say to your team? There's nothing you can say.
And I'm curious to see how they respond to this. Because if it's anything like a Mike Norvell operation we've seen to this point in the year, I think they'll probably go out in the bowl game and play really good football.
The problem is, are those draft guys going to play in
That's
that
a
bowl
big
game
question.
at all?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be, they're going to the Orange Bowl. Like, we don't have to wait for the bowl show on that one. Contractually, they're going to the Orange Bowl. And I believe contractually, they're going to have to play Georgia.
It's a tough draw.
It's the next highest ranked Big Ten or SEC team. So which one was 5? Was Georgia 5? I mean, Georgia was 6. Georgia 6. Yeah, so they're playing Georgia.
It's a tough draw.
Yeah.
It's not a fun draw.
But none of Georgia's draft guys are going to be there either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see what Brock Bowers does in this one. Because he seems like he's the guy that just said multiple times.
He did say, I don't care if my foot falls off my leg, I'm playing.
Let's see.
So,
let's see.
Yeah, given what we've seen from this Florida State team, I could see some of those guys getting together, like the Jared Verse getting those guys together and saying, let's do it. Let's just show that they didn't beat us.
And if they beat Georgia, Andy, are they UCF in it and hanging a banner? I think like internally you got to at least
you can't. They made fun of UCF too much.
They
made too much fun of UCF. You can't do that.
Maybe don't hang a banner, but I think it would do a lot just for the hey.
But
this is what we were capable.
I do
of,
have
and y'all
some
missed out on it.
very hard conversations with the conference leadership about what happened 2 years ago because this is their fault. Like there should be a 12-team playoff right now. Mm-hmm. Florida State would be in it.
Yeah,
but there's not.
And the tough part is too because now you're moving forward and saying, well, things got to change. Like, oh no, they are changing next year. So it's like,
but that doesn't do these people any good.
It's so frustrating. Yeah. It's so frustrating if you're
yeah. It's just it sucks for them. For us, the viewers, it's a pretty intriguing playoff.
Yeah, I think they got it right. At the end of the day, as wild
I don't
as
think
it
there
is
was
to
a
say,
right answer.
I
don't think they could have gotten it right. The system sucked so bad that they had no right answer, and that's why they're getting rid of the stupid system. Unfortunately, they're getting rid of it 1 year too late.
I think they did the best that they could have with the information they had.
Correct. And so, Michigan, Alabama Rose Bowl.
Yep.
Texas, Washington Sugar Bowl. The winners will play for the national title.
It's going to be a good one.
It's going to be a blast to watch.